But who do you say that I am? 2,000 years ago, Jesus posed this question to his disciples. 800 years ago, St. Francis wrestled with this question, and he allowed his imagination to birth a new way of knowing our God. And this morning, friends, together, we reflect on the same question. Who do you say that I am? I dare say Advent is the perfect time to wrestle with the anxiety of this question. And we gather here for this very brief moment of reflection on this snowy Chicago morning to consider this holy time of year anew. Today, I invite us to reimagine the Christ, to become pregnant with the Word of God, and to birth the Christ in our world today, just like St. Francis did so long ago. It amazes me that it took 1,200 years for someone to have the guts to do something like this, to let their imagination run wild. And he did it. It's a wonderful story, isn't it? Can you imagine being there? Wondering what the heck is going on inside of this cave? Francis had spent many, many years trying to become poor, so as to imitate the poor and humble Jesus whom he knew. Francis did this through extreme acts of penance, hours of prayer and fasting and sacrifice. He lived with the lepers whom he devoted his life to serving, all in an attempt to be spiritually wed to, as he calls it, Lady Poverty. It was a love affair. It was a love affair that consumed Francis and is arguably the most important aspect of Franciscan spirituality that we have today. But why poverty? Why poverty? Certainly in today's world, we view poverty not as a virtue, but as an evil. Poverty kills people. We work to eradicate poverty, so why was Francis so enamored with the idea of being poor? To answer this question, it seems we need to return to the Christmas crib. Francis's understanding of Christ, and thus God, was shaped by three moments in the life of Jesus. Three inseparable realities: the crib, the cross, and the Eucharist. Francis saw these inseparable realities and stood in the awe at the poverty of God. A God who self-empties in order to draw near to humanity. This is a different kind of poverty. And in this sense, we can understand poverty differently. Now, to help us contextualize this theology just a bit, I think it's helpful to look at the opposite vantage point. We might have a vision of the Christ as exalted and glorified and sitting on a throne and all-powerful and all-knowing, etc., etc. This is correct. But so too is the position of St. Francis, what we might call a low Christology. And this has drastic implications for our life, for our relationship with God, and for our relationships with other human beings. If we only know, or our starting point is a very high Christology, supreme, all-powerful, all-knowing, all, we can easily develop an idea of a God who is very far away, judgmental, a God with a clipboard who is keeping track of every minute detail of our lives. And we risk developing an image of a God who is unrelatable, and I dare say, unknown. Conversely, too much emphasis on a low Christology can easily allow Jesus to become just our buddy, an abstract idea, just one great philosopher amongst many that lived a long time ago. And this too becomes a problem. And so we strive for that balanced path. Francis of Assisi was operating in the Middle Ages, wherein God was very mysterious, very powerful, very scary, very distant. And this poor man from Assisi encountered a Christ who changed his life. Our King, our Lord of glory, all-powerful, all-encompassing, and very poor. Very humble, very near to us. An awesome God who is very small. Francis got it right. A pile of hay, an ox, and an ass. We're told that Francis desired to see with his bodily eyes in some way the inconveniences of the child from Bethlehem. He had a desire, he had an imagination, and he wanted to contemplate God in a new way. Brothers and sisters, if we're honest with each other, in our heart of hearts, when we close our eyes in prayer, or simply imagine the idea of God, I would venture to say that most of us at some level have an image of one of three things. The old guy with the beard, perhaps Jesus with piercing blue eyes and flowing hair. And then, of course, we've got the bird. We can't forget about the Holy Spirit. We've got the bird. The bird is always present. It's interesting how art and other people's imaginations have influenced our image of God. Maybe some of us only see the old guy with a beard. Perhaps some of us close our eyes and we meet only Jesus. Is there anybody here honest enough to say they only see the bird when they pray? No? Anyone? Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Our way of imagining and perceiving our God has a tremendous impact on our lives of faith. The way we relate to other human beings, the way we relate to ourselves, the way we relate to all of creation and our place within it. St. Francis helped us to see that God is at once supremely powerful and almighty, and yet freely chose to lower himself to be in very, very close relationship to humanity. A God who is the creator of all things, yet freely chose to subject himself to the vulnerabilities of his creation. The God who orders all things in heaven and on earth, yet freely chose to embrace the chaos and disorder of death on a cross. A God who needs for nothing, yet loves us so much that he becomes unimaginably poor for us in the Eucharist. Bread and wine in the hands of sinners. In describing the Eucharist to his very first followers, his first pack of brothers, St. Francis says, "O humble sublimity, O sublime humility, that the Lord of the universe, God and the Son of God, so humbles himself that for our salvation he hides himself under a morsel of bread. Consider, brothers, the humility of God, and pour out your hearts before him, and be humbled that you may be exalted. Do not, therefore, keep back anything for yourselves, that he may receive you entirely, who gives himself up entirely for you." What an awesome God. A poor, humble, vulnerable God. Who do you say that I am? When we're asking questions about Christology, I believe it's more important than getting every single detail absolutely perfect, in fear that we might slip into some kind of a heresy, which is entirely possible. It's entirely possible. If you don't believe me, ask my Dominican friend here. Read some church history. It's possible. But rather, we are asking a deeply personal question. Who is Jesus really in our lives today, this morning, here in Chicago? And then, who am I in the eyes of this Jesus? How we answer these questions shapes our lives in profound ways. Is the Christ so glorified, so exalted that we hardly know him? Or when we pray, we fear being totally vulnerable with him? Is the Christ so relatable that we no longer take him seriously? And then we sacrifice the wonder and the awe that only God deserves. Jesus, the child born to die. A child born surrounded by animals and noise and chaos and discomfort. The same child who entered the chaos of the cross, surrounded by noise and chaos and discomfort. A simple pile of hay, like a table, the place where the animals would come to feast. Jesus, who is food for the animals from the very first moments of his birth. The same child Jesus who is born for us each day on the table of the altar. The child born to feed us. O humble sublimity, O sublime humility. What St. Francis tapped into is the reality that God is very, very near to us, and this is very good news. Brothers and sisters, God is asking us to welcome him into our lives in new and creative ways this Advent. Advent is the time when we allow the Word, when we allow the Christ to penetrate our very being. Christ is asking to be conceived within our hearts and to be birthed into this world in new ways. If you come here today and your idea or your relationship with God is strained, if it's damaged, if it's totally unrealistic or even non-existent, Jesus, who is our God and our brother, is asking permission to descend into our hearts in a new way. And therefore, let us consider just a few questions. What images do you have of God? And how do these images affect your life? Are you allowing the Christ to be born in your heart today? How is the Christ being born in your family, in your workplace, in your circle of influence? How does God's example of self-emptying poverty call us to conversion today? And fundamentally, if you leave here today with one question to ponder, who are you, O God?
God created man in the image and likeness of himself. We are made in the image and likeness of God. And God looked at all his works he had made and called it good. Do we know how good we are? Do we see all that is around us as good? Do we even see our bodies as good? Do we see them as gifts from God? This was something that was crucial for Dominic. We can say it was the principle and premise of Dominic's entire livelihood. Now, unlike my dear brother Francis, who had to boast by writing a few letters and works on paper so that he would be remembered, our humble Father Dominic did not leave any letters or writings behind. But what we do have are stories from the brothers, stories of St. Dominic, stories like the one we just heard about Dominic and the innkeeper, about this Albigensian who denied the goodness of God, who denied that Christ was incarnate. He believed that there was an evil God who created creation, and that there was this good God who created all things spirit. And for Dominic, that didn't make sense. At the heart of Dominic's understanding of the human person is our own human dignity as ones created in the image and likeness of God, and that we are created good. And we stand apart from all other pieces of creation. We were made for God. Only us, only humanity was created in the image and likeness of God. And St. Dominic proclaimed this truth wherever he went. He wanted the people to know that what God had made was good. How he lived spoke to this truth. In his very life, his life was a preaching, not only with his words, but with his actions. His life was a witness to everyone. We know from Dominic's life that he had two things on him at all times. One was the Gospel of Matthew. The other was one of the letters or epistles of St. Paul. And remember, back then, books were expensive. So if you're going to get a book, you might as well get one that you like. And St. Matthew, the Gospel of St. Matthew, was Dominic's favorite gospel. Have you ever noticed what the symbol for St. Matthew's gospel is? Have you ever noticed what that symbol is? It's a winged human. I don't think it's a mistake, because Matthew highlights the gift of the Incarnation as the story of the humanity of Jesus. Just like Brother MJ was talking about low Christology, Matthew is a very low Christological gospel. It talks about this Jesus who so loved us that he entered into human existence. And for that reason, Matthew begins with the infancy narratives, with a long genealogy that describe Jesus coming into human history, that Jesus was in a line of real human people. So I want us to imagine for a second a young Dominic encountering the Word of God, letting every word become like honey, until the words that Dominic read became his very own words. That is, those words imprinted upon him so deeply that he became a word of Christ. So what can Matthew teach us about the Incarnation, about goodness of all creation, about the gift of the Incarnation, about the dignity of the human person? Matthew, of course, shows us those infancy narratives that I mentioned, but he shows a Jesus who gets hungry. Jesus, God, gets hungry like us. He knows the pains of hunger. God so wished to share in every human experience that we face. Matthew also teaches us how to love our enemies, because each and every person is worthy of love, not by what they do, but who they are. Matthew tells us we are worth more than many sparrows. And finally, we have the story of the sheep and the goats, Matthew 25, which shows the dignity of the human person, even those most forgotten, even those we don't want to sit next to, our enemies, the poor, the homeless, those imprisoned. They have a human dignity that is unlike any other. because they were made in the image and likeness of God. And Jesus teaches us how to love them, because he too came to be on this earth, to be one with them. So imagine again this young Dominic reading these stories again and again. Imagine him encountering Jesus. Imagine him encountering the Gospel of Matthew, and specifically the Gospel or the reading of Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats, telling to serve the poor and the homeless, the naked, those imprisoned. It tells of a God incarnate that so loved humanity that he wished to become human in every way except sin. He wanted to show that humanity was worth something so dear that God would come down from his exalted throne to be with us. St. Dominic became so in love with God, so in love with Christ through the Gospel of Matthew, that his life tells the story of the gospel he loved so dearly. For example, when Dominic was just a student studying in the University of Palencia, Dominic encountered the poor. And as you know, students have lots of books. And as he encountered the poor, Dominic looked at his books and said, "How can I study these dead skins, these books, when living skins are dying?" And Dominic sold his books to provide for the poor, because he knew the dignity of each person. In his preachings with the Albigensians, who deprived themselves of food because they believed the body was evil, claimed everything material was evil, and because of that, they lived a very simple and poor life, to which Dominic, in fact, admired. But they believed Christ was spirit. So Dominic had to find a way in which to preach this poor Christ. In a way, he became poor to show the goodness of creation, because he entered into the life of Jesus. Jesus, who became poor like us, who came down from the throne of heaven and incarnated himself to be human. Even Dominic saw the dignity of the Albigensians, for he was willing to stay up all night talking with him, probably after a very long journey, talking with him about the gospel and the goodness of creation. Even in Dominic's prayer life, you can say, mirrors the goodness of the body. Here we have a picture of Dominic receiving the rosary from Jesus through Mary, or from Mary through Jesus. The rosary was something very important to Dominic. And the rosary which we have today comes from the Dominican tradition. The Dominicans contemplated constantly on the mysteries of the rosary, the mysteries of the Incarnation, the joyous mysteries, the mysteries of his resurrection, the glorious mysteries, and the mysteries of his passion and death, the sorrowful mysteries. It was a very incarnational prayer which Dominic prayed. But not only that, Dominic would pray with his entire body, with gestures and motions. He would bow, he would prostrate, he would kneel, because he knew that our bodies were good. Our bodies could glorify the Lord. We're Catholics. We worship God with our bodies. We genuflect, we kneel, we stand, and we do it all over again. We use our bodies to worship the God who created all things that were good. This Jesus that Dominic encounters tells us of our own human worth. And so this Advent, we come to the point in our spiritual journey to contemplate our own human worth through the gift of the Incarnation. So right now, imagine the nativity scene. Imagine everyone in their place, with Mary and Joseph and the oxen and baby Jesus. What we have is an infant, but more than an infant. It is the creator of the heavens and the earth, unlimited power in a tiny, helpless body. The God who fashioned all that exists, the heavens and the earth, with his own hands, can barely wrap his finger around the finger of his mother. Do we know how good we are? Do we know how good we are? When I was a kid, I was shy. I too experienced bullying in my life, even though I did nothing wrong. It came to a point when I believed I was a nobody. God obviously made me bad. Not good, but bad. And in some sense, I grew to dislike this world. How can this world be good, I would tell myself. And it wasn't until college that I met a Franciscan priest, and so then joined the Dominican order. But you could see the joy on his face. And I said to myself, I wish I was that happy. Where does he find this joy? He told me to sit down, be present to the scriptures, to sit in the silence and learn from Christ. And soon I found a Christ, a God so madly in love with creation that he wanted to become like one of us. A love so deep that he would call us good. No matter what I have done, I am still made good. We are creations fearfully and wonderfully made. Do we know how good we are? And do we share that goodness with others? My friends, this is the season in which we ponder the mystery of the Incarnation and the goodness of creation. So I have a few questions that we too may ponder this season. When we go outside, do we see all that God has made to be good? Do we see goodness in the stranger and those most forgotten among us? And do we have the opportunity to support the dignity of others in acts of charity? And finally, but most importantly, in the line of St. Dominic, what can the scriptures teach us about the goodness of creation and the gift of the Incarnation? And do we take time to sit and meditate upon them?
When Brother Nicholas and I began months ago discerning and discussing possible ways to approach an Advent day of reflection, many ideas emerged. More from him than from me, because Dominicans are brighter than Franciscans. That's just a fact. But in our defense, we have cooler habits. Brown covers a multitude of sins, isn't that right, Brother Nick? Especially when it's spaghetti night at the friary. But as we spoke and discerned, we landed on the topic of all things, mystical conception and birthing the Christ. Now, please forgive me. Do not think that for a single moment that the absurdity of two male, celibate, religious friars talking about pregnancy has escaped us. It hasn't. But we will be talking about a different kind of conception and birth. The idea of spiritual conception has captivated the imaginations of mystics and saints throughout the ages, and we will be attempting to reflect on two such mystical theologians this morning. For my time, I would like to introduce a very obscure text written by a very important saint. Saint Bonaventure was born in the year 1217 near central Italy. Considering that Saint Francis of Assisi died in 1226, the two never crossed paths, but we have a nice little story that when Saint Bonaventure was a small child, he had a life-threatening illness, and his mother, who had heard of Saint Francis, prayed for the holy man's intercession, and Bonaventure was magically healed, miraculously healed, and so he attributed this miraculous healing in his decision to become a Franciscan friar, following after Saint Francis in the year 1243. Saint Bonaventure studied at the University of Paris and was a contemporary of another great saint, Saint Thomas Aquinas, Dominican. Bonaventure was elected the minister general of all of the Franciscans in 1257, and he's often referred to as the second founder of the order because he really helped to solidify the Franciscan order in the early days of the church, the Franciscan founding was tumultuous. And he really put us on solid footing, and for this he's known as the second founder. He died on July 15th, 1274. He is undoubtedly one of the brightest minds to emerge from the Christian tradition, and as such, he has been given the title of the Seraphic Doctor. But what we are concerned with today is Saint Bonaventure the mystic. So what is mystical theology? Who is a mystic? Can we be mystics today? Advent, my friends, is a perfect time for mystics to emerge. This season, the liturgy, the readings, the natural world, the weather, it seems that everything about this time is pregnant with a sense of anxiety and anticipation. This wonderful cosmic interplay between life and death to bring new life. The whole of creation stands on the edge of this anxiety in hopeful anticipation of the Christ experience. And mystics, I think, seem to be those women and men who were able to somehow find the language to express just a little piece of this anxiety. These women and men throughout the centuries have found a way to labor through the limitations of human language and the limitations of our imagination, and were, in a sense, able to give birth to God in a new way. They helped bring us the mystery. And in their writings and reflections, we too are able to touch just a little piece of this God mystery. Saint Bonaventure was on his own Advent day of reflection some 800 years ago Except St. Bonaventure wasn't in a beautiful church in the middle of Chicago. In fact, he wasn't in a church at all. He was atop a mountain in central Italy, hunkered down in a cave. Basically the same thing, right? And while St. Bonaventure was in this cave, he quieted his mind. He entered the silence and the protection of the cave, and he became totally present to that moment. And thus Bonaventure began his reflection. Now, thanks be to God, St. Bonaventure wrote down this little reflection, and it was only recently discovered and translated. It was translated from some out-of-date Umbrian dialect. We found it, we translated it, and now the Christian faithful have another tool for our spiritual journey. St. Bonaventure calls this lovely, pious little text the 5 feasts of the child Jesus. And just a side note, housekeeping, we gave this to you all when you came in, so take it with you beyond the walls of this church and meditate on it for the remainder of your Advent experience, and read through it again on Christmas morning. It's very brief. It's only 8 pages long. But we're going to see if we can have a little fun with it this morning. St. Bonaventure asks the reader to become a devout soul, so as to become receptive to this journey. That is, become a mystic. Be still, be attentive, quiet your mind, engage the anxiety, and be totally open to God's grace. We are asked then to conceive, to name, to adore with the Magi, and to present in the temple. Now, mystical theology is tricky. It's never ever what it seems on the surface, and I suspect the same applies here. What appears to be a simple 8-page pious little roadmap for spiritual life is actually a deeper roadmap for serious spiritual conversion. As for my interpretation, I would like to suggest that this document is an invitation to die. It's a sort of memento mori. Remember your death. Or maybe more accurately, we could look at this document as an ars moriendi, the art of dying. The Buddhist tradition has a wonderful phrase. The Buddhists tell us that we should die before we die, so that when you die, there's not much left of you to die, so that now you may truly live until you die. Take that one home and ponder it before you go to bed. Ego death. Ego death in order that we may truly live. And this is a sacred art form. This is an ars moriendi. Bonaventure engages this reading by asking us to become like the Virgin, to see Advent through the eyes of Mary, the model of ego death par excellence. Let it be done to me according to your will. In our journey of spiritual motherhood, we too can die to whatever in our lives stands in the way of the Word of God showing forth. And if we follow this roadmap from Bonaventure, we too can allow the Holy Spirit to overshadow us, and we can bring forth the Christ. I have decided to approach this text as a sort of personal meditation on Bonaventure's meditation. What follows is simply the fruit of my prayers after sitting with this text for several months. And so we enter the cave alongside St. Bonaventure. Let's take a moment and still our minds and enter the darkness and the coolness and the safe place of the cave with St. Bonaventure. Enter the darkness and begin our journey. The first feast, Conceiving the Son of God. God wishes to impregnate the devout soul so that we may become fruitful. God desires spiritual procreation, but we need to make sure that the soil is tilled and prepared to receive such a gift. Before we can conceive, we need to pull out the weeds and clear the ground. Brothers and sisters, this is Advent. In the midst of Christmas lights and overeating and festive music and holiday shopping, as we become victims of mass distraction, let us not forget that Advent is the anxious season. And it's a time for deep internal reflection and conversion. Prepare the way for the Lord. When we conceive, like Mary, we flee to the hill country. We begin to create space from the things of the world that would prevent the Word of God from growing inside of us. We change our location, we change our minds, we turn our hearts around. We begin to see ourselves in this world very differently. We begin to die to ourselves so that the Word may live. Go then, devout soul, flee to the hill country. St. Bonaventure writes that on this journey we will encounter other people who will try to stop our progress. He says these people want to infect the soul with an insidious cowardice. Perhaps these people aren't people at all. Perhaps these people represent something internal. These cowardly people may then be seen as the anxieties and the fears of our own souls. It's that part of us inside that wants to cling to the ego. The part of us that's afraid to allow God to be conceived within us, the part of us that is afraid to die. These people, as Bonaventure notes, are worldly minded. And if you take their advice, and if you stop now and quit this journey, he warns that you will kill the Son of God that has been conceived within you. These are strong words. In other words, this journey, my brothers and sisters, is not for the faint of heart. God is asking for all of our being, total willingness to become one with the divine nature, total openness to God's superabundant gift. Turn back now if you are not ready to take this journey. Turn back if you are not prepared to die, so that you can live. But we can only do this if we have prepared a fitting place for God's child to be born within us. Let us cast our gaze once again on the Christmas creche. Hay, ox, ass. Have we impoverished our hearts enough for the Incarnation? Or are the riches of our ego creating chaos and weeds in our soil? Be courageous, devout soul. Let go. Empty yourself this day of whatever prevents the word from being conceived within you. Prepare for the greatest gift of all, and remember, it is no longer I who live, but you, Jesus Christ, who lives within me. When we accept this journey of ego death, we set off to the hill country. And like Mary, who set off to the hill country to encounter Elizabeth, we too are being asked to bring this Christ to others. Now pregnant with Christ, we continue our journey. The second feast, birthing the Christ. The pains of birth. The immense pains of birth. Pulling the weeds of chaos from our soul in order to lay a fresh bed of hay for our God, this can be a painful process. We find pain because it is much easier to hold on. We grip very tightly to these egoic structures that we've spent our whole lives constructing. This story we tell ourselves. I am so important. I am so powerful. People respect me. I am strong. I am beautiful. I am in control of everything. How will they remember me when I'm gone? These are massive egoic fortresses that we build. And now we have to destroy them so we can make room for the Christ. The seed has been planted, and we have made the conscious decision to follow this journey. And we may begin to encounter the anxieties and the pains that we confront when we find this tension between the life of the egoic world and the life of the Incarnation. Bonaventure says that this tension comes when the spirit longs for solitude, but the flesh craves the crowd. Part of this spiritual conversion, this mystical journey, this confrontation of the anxiety of Advent, requires that we embrace the contemplative space needed to birth the Christ. This contemplative space is made when we've gone up to the hill country. We find Elizabeth in a higher place, a contemplative place. But when the pain starts, when the time comes to give birth, we bid farewell to St. Bonaventure, and we have to leave the cave. And we begin to make the journey of the immigrant soul. scared and anxious and vulnerable, just like Mary. Totally open to the God experience. Trust now, devout soul. God, who has begun this great work in you, will bring it to completion. And you reach the innermost sanctuary of your soul, your inner Bethlehem. The creche of your heart has been dusted with the poverty of hay, the vulnerable spot for the child to lay his head. And we begin to relinquish control of the egoic fortress. And then the child may be born unto you. We may now hold Jesus tenderly, like Mary, and we contemplate the new self that has emerged. We can birth this new life because we have allowed the identity to die. The part of us that desperately tries to cling and control and master is dead and opens up the space for this new life, this new child to emerge. The pain is indeed immense. But when we can release that which keeps us stuck, we birth the promise. And we hold this Christ child in our arms, and we gaze into the baby as in a mirror. And we see the new I. St. Bonaventure writes, "In truth, we find how good he is when we nourish him with our prayers, bathe him in the waters of our warm and loving tears. We wrap him in the spotless, swaddling clothes of our desires, and we carry him in an embrace of holy love. And we kiss the child over and over again with our heartfelt longings, and we cherish him in the bosom of our most innermost heart." Like the Virgin Mary, we adore our child. We adore our new self, the gift of the mystical soul's journey into God. The third feast, how we now name the infant Jesus. There is no sweeter name than Jesus. When St. Francis was bringing forth the Christ in his own way at this first Christmas creche, they celebrated a Mass at this place. St. Francis preached, and the story says that the words were so sweet, they were like honey dripping from his mouth, that he even stuttered trying to say the name of Jesus. The biographer says he stuttered so much that he sounded like a bleating sheep. When Jesus is the honey on our lips, the world is sweeter. Our lives have a different flavor. And this name is holy. This name is powerful. Bonaventure says the name is powerful because it brings down our enemies, restores our strength, and renews our mind. When we contemplate the name of Jesus, the child we have brought into existence, the child who is like a mirror of beauty and truth, the sweet and powerful name, we slowly begin to lose ourselves into Jesus. This name is grace-filled because in the name of Jesus resides our hope. This name soothes us when we are fearful of letting go. And as we let go of this egoic self that tries desperately to keep us bound up, we find our refuge in the name of Jesus. Our peace, our refuge is in the letting go and in the taking up of the name Jesus. Jesus, Son of God, Son of Mary, Jesus, the child born to die, Jesus, the child who became poor so that we might become infinitely rich. Jesus, it is no longer I who lives, but you, Jesus, who lives in me. Let go. Let go of what keeps you stuck and find peace in the name above all names. Name the child that has been gifted to you. The fourth feast, how the Son of God is sought and adored with the Magi. The three kings set off on their journey to find the true king. St. Bonaventure says that the three kings may represent the three powers of the soul: the intellect, the will, and the heart. And so we journey with the Magi to find the one who will order our internal powers. Jesus, the child who will bring creation and order to the chaos of our intellects, wills, and hearts. The child who illumines our intellect, purges the faults of our wills, and brings our hearts into contemplative union with its Creator. Does your mind long to know Him? Is your will in need of the guiding light of the northern star that will lead to Him? Is your heart troubled by the anxieties of this world? What are you searching for? And who do you long to see? Beg Herod to tell you where to find the Christ, and set off in pilgrimage to the one whom we have longed for, the one whom the prophets foretold. And when we encounter Him, resting in the poverty of the manger, we fall on our knees and we adore. And just like the Magi, once we encounter the Christ child, we go back by different routes. We are changed. We are never the same. The new self may be set free in this world to share the hope of Christ with a world still searching for the true light. The fifth feast, how the Son of God is presented in the temple. Take a deep breath. You have completed your pilgrimage, devout soul. Christ has illuminated your heart and your mind, and the new self has emerged. And now, standing before the throne of the eternal Trinity, you present your Son of God. The unshackled new self is placed at the foot of the throne. The Christ child whom we have brought into existence and nursed at the breast of our self-emptying will is then handed right back to God, who brought this new self into existence through his grace. And now that the Christ has been conceived, born, named, adored, and presented, O devout soul, all that is left is to stand in awe. And we give praise and thanks always and everywhere. The most obvious sign of someone who has had the Christ truly born in them is the person who lives a life of endless gratitude, thanksgiving, and praise. Because a person who lives in this continuous state of gratefulness and praise has no fear of death. This person has learned the art of dying very, very well. This person, devout soul, is already dead and now is fully alive within the Christ. The 5 feasts of the child Jesus. So what does this all mean? A few questions to wrestle with in our minds. What is stopping you from conceiving the Christ in your life this morning? What egoic structures have we constructed that need to be torn down? What weeds need to be plucked from the hay of our creche? Are you a slave to the fear of the idea of death? And how does this affect the way you live your life? Why do we find it so hard to leave the cave and make the journey of the immigrant soul? How will we birth the Christ in our world this Advent season?
When I think of the mystical life, or of mysticism, and its relationship to how we understand ourselves and our relationship to Christ and in our very lives, the person I can't help but think of is a man from our own Dominican tradition, Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart was a Dominican theologian, philosopher, but most importantly, he was a mystic. And like most mystics, like Bonaventure, they strained to find words that could explain the union between God and humankind, the living of the divine life in the world. His unique understanding of his mystical theology eventually found him at the hands of his arch nemesis, the Franciscans. figures it was the Franciscans accusing the Dominicans, defenders of truth, of heresy. But today, he has become repopularized. And the church has acknowledged that there was really nothing wrong with Eckhart himself, but maybe a few things that were said that were kind of confusing or taken out of context. In fact, Pope Benedict and John Paul II have used Eckhart in various sermons. And so I want to share with you a piece of my own tradition of being a Dominican, and share with you some of Eckhart's deepest insights into how we too can be mystics, how we too can be in union with God, and how we can birth God into the world. And so I want to begin with a piece from Sermon 8. So I want you to relax, get comfortable, because we're going to dive deep, deep into the depths of our own souls. And this is what Eckhart says. Our Lord Jesus went up into a citadel and was received by a virgin who was a wife. Now, mark this word carefully. It must of necessity be a virgin, the person by whom Jesus was received. Virgin is as much as to say a person who is void of all alien images, as empty as he was when he did not exist. Images. For a moment, I want us to play around with images. I want everyone to think of how important images are to us, how useful they can be in our lives. For example, we have the use of our imagination. They help us look beyond what is in front of our very eyes. We may remember as children, we may used to imagine ourselves as being a doctor or a teacher. We imagine ourselves in the future. But also, too, we have an understanding or an image of ourselves, of who we are. We have an understanding of what we like, what we don't like. We have an understanding of how things may need to be done in our lives. We may even have an understanding of our own personality, whether we may be introverted or extroverted. These are pictures we have of who we are, and they help us gain a sense of an understanding of who I am and my role in society. They help us answer the deepest question: who am I? Who am I? We also have images of others. We may have an understanding of their own personality, their own gifts, even their own weaknesses. In some sense, that helps us understand who they are. And not only that, we have images of God, don't we? Sometimes we view God as a loving father, a loving parent, to help comfort us when we are in trouble. Sometimes we may view God as the superhero, someone who comes in and saves the day. Still others may view God simply as the mystical magician who can fix problems in a snap. And my favorite, sometimes we may view God as the glorified pest dispenser. I pray, God, now give me what I want. Give me the candy. We have all these sorts of images floating in our head that, in a way are very useful. At times when we need comforting, we understand God as a parent. So what is the problem with all these images? Why does Eckhart want us to be as empty as we were when we did not exist, void of alien images? The answer? Images can ultimately distract us. Think about it. Let us return for a second to Brother MJ's preaching, when he said that our understandings of the egoic self, that it's about a death to one's self. I have an understanding of who I am, but is that really who I am? Getting rid of these alien images returns oneself to a creation point. So let's return to that question then. What images do you have? How do you see God? And is that really who God is? Ask yourself, how do you see yourself? And is that really who you are? Ask yourself, how do I see others? And is that how God really sees them? Eckhart wants a detachment from things. This is what he means by being at the point of where you did not exist. A detachment from images of self, images of God, even understandings of how things ought to be done in our life. Because in the end, it's about freedom. An interior freedom. A freedom to truly say yes, just like the Blessed Mary of a Virgin, to receive God in our inmost being, into the very depths of our souls. Brother MJ brought up again a very good image of soil, of tilling the soil and having weeds in the soil. We can't plant anything, nothing will grow if the weeds aren't removed. If our understandings of God, self, and others are in the way, we must remove them before the seed of God's Word can take root into what Eckhart says, the ground of one's soul. It is a preparing exercise. Think about, for example, for you mothers out there, preparing for a long-awaited child. There's a lot of cleaning that needs to get done. You have to prep the nursery. You have to prepare a room. You have to buy a crib. You have to buy a changing table. And then you have to buy the diapers. And then preparing the house and preparing all the accessories that come with having a new child. But it's only when we are truly prepared are we truly free to receive that child into our lives. Otherwise, we're going to be anxious, worried about what is going to happen if we don't have clothes or diapers or having a crib or having a room. It's about freedom. The same is true with our soul. We have to prepare our soul. It needs to be a fertile soil, a fertile ground in which to receive the seeds of the Word of God, to receive God in the soul. And within this freedom, God speaks. Eckhart says, in the midst of silence, there was spoken within me a secret word. But, sir, where is the silence? And where is the place where the word is spoken? As I said just now, it is in the purest thing that the soul is capable of, and the noblest part, the ground. Indeed, in the very essence of the soul, which is the soul's most secret part, in the very depths of our being, in the silence of our hearts, God speaks a word. God speaks His word into the depths of our souls. This is a unique moment, a special moment, a Genesis moment, a moment in which the soul is refashioned in the image of God. Think of the Genesis story. In the silence, in the darkness, in the void of chaos, God speaks His word into the silence, and light came about, and in the end, all creation was formed. The word that God speaks isn't just any word. It is the word of God. God speaks Himself into the soul. Eckhart continues, He will speak His word and Himself in the soul. No image, but Himself. God doesn't place within us a cheap imitation or a God look-alike. We receive God's very self in the depths of our being. We have images around this church. They depict the reality in which they point to, but it's not the reality itself. God doesn't put a statue or an image of Himself in our soul, but God dwells. God in His essence dwells in our souls. As Eckhart says, we become pregnant with the Word of God. Think of the tilling of the soil and then the planting of the seeds, and the seeds taking root in that ground. The soil has conceived and become pregnant in a way. And if this is the seeds of the Word of God in the depths of our souls have become pregnant with that Word. And this Word changes everything. It changes us, makes us into living words of that one word, Christ, the Son of God. In that moment, we become that image of God. When we finally learn to let go of our attachments and images, we are molded by God to be that image, not to be a creation of ourselves, not to be an image of who we think we ought to be, not to be an image in a sense of who we think God ought to be in us, but letting God be God in the soul, as Eckhart says. Because in the end, we were made for God. We were made to be a dwelling for God. Only humankind has the capacity for charity. Only humankind has the capacity to be that image of God. And this tells us something. This is a God who so loves us that not only did He endure life with us, He bound Himself to our very souls. He becomes the very life of our souls. God, in His entirety, dwells in the very ground of our being, as Eckhart says. I'm not sure how many of you remember your baptism, but our baptism really should be considered, as I like to say, our heavenly birthday. Some may consider the day we moved from this world to the next as our heavenly birthday. But it is at our baptism that we received God in our inmost depths. We are given the gift of the Holy Spirit. Heaven is now dwelling in our souls. Think of what that can mean for our lives, that we have the capacity to show heaven to others. In that moment, when we become this image of God, heaven is born in our hearts. We just need to let go of our attachments and let God be God in the soul. And He will speak His very self into our very lives. It's because when we let go, God births His Son through the Spirit in our soul. We are given what's known as the Trinitarian life, the life of the Trinity dwelling in us, heaven dwelling in us, dwelling in the very ground of our being. And that creates in us our very nature as images of God. But I think there's ways in which we can express it. And I think Catherine of Siena said it best. In your nature, eternal Godhead, I shall come to know my nature. And what is my nature? Boundless love? It is fire. Because you are nothing but a fire of love. And you have given humankind a share in this nature. For by the fire of love, you created us. So with all other people and every created thing, you made them out of love. This is the primary reason why Eckhart does not like attachments to images or attachments to understandings of doing things. He wants to let God teach us, to mold us, and shape us. Because we are to be the very love that He is. It is in that moment we can exclaim like St. Paul, "It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me." That is when we are pregnant with the Word, when the Word has so infilled our very, very lives, touches our core. But is that enough? Is it enough to just be free in our souls from attachments and just to receive God? Perhaps if you are a Trappist monk or a Carthusian hermit, that may be acceptable. But it's definitely not true for a Dominican, and maybe not true for a Franciscan. I don't know. I'm a little doubtful. But Eckhart, true to his Dominican roots, has something better in mind than just detachment and the receiving and growth of God in oneself. And this is what he says. If a man were to be ever virginal, he would bear no fruit. If he is to be fruitful, he must be a wife. Wife is the noblest title one can bestow on the soul, far nobler than virgin. For a man to receive God within him is good, and in receiving, he is a virgin. But for God to be fruitful in him is better. For only the fruitfulness of the gift is the thanks rendered for that gift. And herein, the Spirit is a wife, whose gratitude is fecundity, bearing Jesus again in God's paternal heart. Very odd language. And don't think, like MJ has escaped my mind, that even guys are being considered to be called a wife. And it's equally awkward for a celibate man to be not only talking about birth, but also talking about being a wife. Mystics are strange people, if we are honest. But they are deeply insightful. And so I want to repeat that last part again. Only the fruitfulness of the gift is the thanks rendered for that gift. And herein, the Spirit is a wife. What does it really mean to be fruitful? I want to recall for a moment maybe a couple of saints from my own tradition as a Dominican, particularly the patron of my province, Saint Martin de Porres. Saint Martin was the son of a freed slave woman and a Spaniard noble, in fact. And during his childhood, he often had it rough. Not many friends, as you can imagine, being the son of a slave person. And so during the night, he would contemplate before a crucifix that he had, a small crucifix. And he was given a little candle stub. And throughout the night, he would light that candle and contemplate the crucifix. Imagine Martin encountering the crucifix and finding a God who became human to share in his pain. Christ knew the pain of Martin because Christ endured it. In that, Martin found God's immense love for humanity. And filled with that immense love and joy, he felt he had no choice but to share it. In this image of conception and pregnancy, God so filled him with the knowledge of his love through the indwelling of the Spirit and the Trinity in the very ground of his being. It bubbled forth. In fact, Eckhart uses this image of the bubbling of the Trinity inside the soul. It boils, and if something boils long enough, it must boil over. It must be given to birth. And so he healed many people with his skills as a barber, which was the equivalent of like being a surgeon back then. He took care of the poor and even hid the poor in the Dominican priory, which the brothers obviously didn't like too much, having strangers in the house, not knowing them. But his mission was clear. His mission was to be the word of Christ in the world, to be the love that God had called him to be the very love of God itself. Another example is Catherine of Siena. Catherine was a third-order Dominican. She was a laywoman, but attached herself to the Dominican order. She was born in Siena, Italy, and by the age of 7, she declared herself to be wedded to Christ. She wanted to dedicate her life to Christ. And so her family set up for her a small little room in their house in which she could stay and contemplate. And she did so for 3 years until God spoke to her. In fact, Christ spoke to her. and she was told to go out into the world. Christ kicked her out of her little cell of contemplation to go into the world. She would later go on to serve the needs of the community in Siena. She ministered to prisoners. She eventually was the one who convinced the Pope, who was in Avignon, France, to return back to Rome. Everything she did came from her immense love of Christ and what she called the interior cell. If she couldn't go to a room to contemplate, the room was in the silence of her interior self. In fact, action became such a big part of Catherine's life that at one point, when in dialoguing with Christ, Christ tells her, on 2 feet you must walk, and on 2 wings you must soar to heaven. Which is better, the foot of contemplation or the foot of action? Is it better to just receive God, or is it better to also be fruitful? And in acting in the community, she birthed God into the world. I want to return back to that prayer I mentioned earlier that Catherine told us about the nature of ourselves. She mentions we are a fire of love. Think about fire, for example. Fire is contagious. Everything it touches, it spreads more and more. What both St. Martin and St. Catherine found in receiving the words in the silence of their contemplation, they realized that they bore Christ in themselves. They bore the Word in their hearts. And that love so welled up in them, they had no choice but to share it with others. And sharing that love, they not only birthed Christ in their own souls, they birthed Christ into the world. So this Advent, we wait for Christ's coming. How often do we just sit in silence and say, "Here am I, Lord. Come and make your home with me." And if I'm honest, we often have trouble entering into silence, entering into that cave, as Brother MJ mentioned. Because when we are alone, we have thoughts that bug us, distractions, maybe even past hurts we haven't come to terms with. But like Eckhart says, these are thoughts and images. They aren't truly who we are. Just be. Just be. Let God be God in you, so that you may come to know the love that God has for you. And that love, when it boils over, will become the joy for your service. So in what ways can we be fruitful this Advent? How can we let others know that Christ wants to enter into their lives, that God wants to speak His Son into their souls? Perhaps serving others, serving the poor, being mindful of the homeless. In whatever way necessary, we can birth God into the world. We should try, because God so wants to make this love known. Just don't let that fire of love that God has placed into the depths of your soul just remain with you. Share it. In fact, light up the world, as Catherine says. Light it up like a blaze. Birth God into the world, to a world that has so many forgotten people. The homeless, the refugee, even the lonely person at work or school. Because the only person stopping God from being truly birthed into this world is ourselves. All we need is to be open, to let go, and to let God just be God in the depths of our soul.